A young, beautiful and successful woman, Emily, lives in New York City. She is married to a powerful and wealthy businessman, Stephen. Stephen holds a high position on Wall Street, where he works in a large investment company, and it would seem that his life is full of success and wealth. However, despite the outward idol, there are clearly problems in their marriage. Emily feels lonely and unhappy in her marriage. She starts cheating on her husband with a young and charismatic artist, David Shaw. Their affair is passionate, but Emily realizes that there is something dangerous and mysterious about it. David, though talented, is clearly not as simple as he seems at first glance. Meanwhile, Stephen begins to suspect that his wife is cheating on him. He discovers some suspicious phone conversations and notices changes in Emily's behavior. He manages to identify his wife's lover, and this leads him to dig deeper into David's past. Stephen learns that David is not who he says he is. He is a con man who has used many aliases and engaged in various crimes to make ends meet. Now knowing this, Stephen decides to use this information to his advantage. Stephen's financial problems are piling up, and he sees the situation as an opportunity to solve his problems and get rid of his unfaithful wife at the same time. He comes up with the perfect plan to offer David to kill Emily for a large sum of money. He believes that David is greedy and desperate and will agree to this proposal. Stephen hopes that Emily's death will not only allow him to solve his financial problems, but also to receive her inheritance, which will save him from bankruptcy. Stephen meets with David and makes him this offer. David, though shocked, agrees. He really needs the money, and besides he thinks he can trick Stephen and get the money without committing murder. Meanwhile, Emily continues to date David, unaware of the insidious plans weaving around her. Stephen carefully crafts the details of the murder. He creates an alibi for the evening of the crime, planned so that it cannot be linked to his wife's murder. He prepares the money to give to David and considers how to make sure that suspicion falls on a random perpetrator and not on himself. The evening comes when the murder is to take place. Stephen leaves the house as planned, giving David the opportunity to enter the apartment and kill Emily. David gets into the apartment using the key Stephen gave him and finds Emily in the bathroom. But at that moment, something unexpected happens. Emily realizes that her life is in danger and begins to fight for her life. During a fierce struggle, she kills her attacker, not realizing that it was not David, but another man. It turns out that David hired a third person to commit the murder in his place, leaving him unaware of his involvement in the case. When Stephen returns home, he discovers the body of the assassin and realizes that his plan has gone awry. Now he needs to hide the evidence to avoid becoming a suspect. He takes the money he prepared for David and tries to erase all traces of his participation in the conspiracy. Emily is shocked by what has happened, but she doesn't know that her husband is involved. She goes to the police and an investigation begins. Stephen, using his influence and connections, tries to convince the investigators that it was an ordinary robbery that ended in murder, but his behavior begins to seem suspicious. Emily gradually begins to doubt that she knows her husband as well as she thought she did. She recalls the strange moments in their relationship, his constant absences and his cold attitude towards her. Meanwhile, David begins to blackmail Stephen. He demands more money from him, threatening to reveal the truth about who actually planned the murder. Stephen realizes that he is trapped in a trap that he himself created. He begins to develop a new plan to get rid of David without becoming a suspect. Meanwhile, the police find new evidence that indicates that the murder was not just a random robbery. The investigator in charge of the case begins to suspect that other people are involved. He scrutinizes Stephen's alibi and finds inconsistencies. Stephen begins to panic. He realizes that his time is running out and he must act quickly. He decides to eliminate David to get rid of the threat of exposure. He comes up with a plan to kill David and make it look like self-defense or an accident. One evening, Stephen sets up a meeting with David to supposedly give him money. In reality, he plans to kill him and stage an attack. But David is more cunning than that. He realizes that Stephen is up to no good and prepares for it. The meeting between them turns into a tense confrontation, during which they both find themselves on the verge of death. In the end, Stephen manages to kill David, but not in the way he planned. He stages it as an accident, hoping that the police will not investigate the case further. However, the police continue to investigate and get on David's trail. They discover his connections to Emily and Stephen and begin to suspect that Stephen may be involved in the case. Emily, feeling threatened and realizing that her husband may be involved in the conspiracy, begins her own investigation. She finds evidence to support her suspicions and decides to confront Stephen. They end up having a tense conversation during which Stephen confesses everything. He tells her his plan, how he wanted to get rid of her and get her inheritance to solve his financial problems. Emily is shocked and appalled, but she keeps her cool. She realizes that she now has all the evidence she needs to turn Stephen into the police eye. In the climax of the movie, Emily sets a trap for Stephen to confess to his crimes. She records his confession on a tape recorder and gives the tape to the police. Stephen realizes that his plan has finally failed and he will be punished for all his crimes. The police arrest Stephen and his life falls apart. Emily, despite the horror she has endured, is finally free from her husband's tyranny. She realizes that she deserves better and decides to start a new life. Stephen is brought to trial and punished for his crimes. Emily, despite all her experiences, gains strength and independence, realizing that she is able to cope with any difficulties. The movie ends on a note of hope for Emily, who is finally freed from the shadow of her husband and can start a new life without fear and lies.